This is Fraser Simpson. I'm here with Osvaldo Minchella, and the newest addition to the tax mechanic team as a client liaison. And Ossie, I've known you for a while. You're a client turned worker bee. So you've got kind of an interesting past. Why don't you tell us, a bit about your origin story? How did you get to be sitting in front of me here today?
Okay, well, I'll start with I'm born in Toronto, and I was raised in Toronto and went to school in Toronto. But I got introduced to taxation at a very, very early age. My father had a paving company, and at the age of 14, to go even farther back, at the age of 4, my father felt that mathematics was necessary. So before I went to school, he taught me the times table from 1 times 1 to 12 times 12. So when he came home at night, I used to have to recite the times table, like 7, 14, 21, 28. So by the time I was 4 years old, I knew all the way to 144, forward, backwards, sideways, okay? And from that, I had a little bit of a problem in school, when I went to school. My first language is Italian, dialect. So when I went to school, I only knew a couple of words, and they weren't very nice words in English. So the beginning of my schooling, there was a lot of miscommunication, which led to aggression. There's only 2 Italians in the school, Nick Natali and myself at Drury Public School. So I had to protect Nick because he was a skinny little thing, but I was a skinny little thing too. So we had to learn how to fight. Later, by grade 2, we kind of integrated and everybody was copacetic. And then I had a problem with addition because to me, 2 plus 2 was 4 because I knew 2 times 2 was 4. But 3 plus 3 was always 9 because I knew that 3 times 3 was 9. I didn't know addition. So I learned multiplication before addition, okay? And I kept going on with, knowing numbers pretty well and working with numbers. I numbered my alphabet 1 to 26. And a lot of times I used to write messages with numbers designated to the letter, right? Like I love you or I hate you in numbers, and the person wouldn't even know what those numbers mean, right? So at 14 years old, my father introduced me to income tax. So at 14 years old, I did my father's and my mother's income tax return. I got into, understanding all of the laws and all of the deductions and everything else at that time. Like you're talking at this point, it's 1974, 1975. 76, I was 16 years old, I tackled his business taxes. By the time I was 20, I was doing income tax returns for friends and relatives, okay? Some relatives didn't want me to do their tax returns because, it's a privacy issue and stuff like that. But I would go on Saturdays and Sundays and go to people's homes and do their tax returns. And when they saw what I could do, the major feedback that I got is they wanted me to marry their daughters because they thought I was going to become an accountant, okay? I also developed a great love for music. So when I finished high school and then I finished grade 13, instead of going to accounting at York, I decided to go to Seneca for electronics because I liked stereos, I liked music, and I liked computers. So I got my accounting background from doing things with the family, not actually going to accounting. And then I went to work, when I graduated, I went to work with Radio Shack, 1985. I trained with him in 84, 1985. I had my own business for a few years, which was Teleguide to Ontario. It was basically a version of the internet, but it was called Teledon. It was basically the very first, how would you say, distributed terminals in hotels, advertising restaurants. And I did that for a few years. Then we closed down that business and I went to work for Radio Shack. Then I went to Radio Shack at First Canadian Place. I was a computer manager. And there I met a gentleman who I was doing programming for. Then I went to work for his company, which was a tax shelter company. Worked in that company for about 5 years, managing and learning about tax shelters. I was then embroiled into a whole tax fight about tax shelters with Revenue Canada. And I was learning from some of the best accountants and lawyers in taxation at the time while I worked at the company, but I didn't know that. I was just absorbing it. I was making some pretty good money, but I would have done it for free. So then when I left the company, the case turned from taxation to fraudulent activity. And because I had worked there, I got drawn into that. And because of my principles, or because of the friction between me and the judicial system or whatever, I was actually charged. I was charged. Then I went through a whole preliminary. I went through a whole criminal trial. I wasn't well off. I was using legal aid because, it takes a lot of money to fight the government on something that large. It was a $118 million tax fraud. So subsequent to that, I was dragged through the system. I appealed it. I appealed it to the Supreme Court. I lost. And then it was back to the tax case. And the tax case continued until 2008, where a judge, Justice Bowie, said that it was a precedent-setting decision where the judge said that the investors or the people who would own these tax shelters could go to tax court and could actually ascertain facts contrary to the previous proceedings. And that's very rare, because usually if you're going to go to any kind of court, you can never adjudicate in that court in a way that's different than findings in other courts. But in this case, the investors got their day in court. And the reason I understand that to be is because, from what I understand from the experts, that the tax case should have happened before the other proceedings, but they were withheld. Finally, I testified in their tax case in late 2012 on behalf of 176 investors and myself. And then the judge gave a decision in 2014, which was very good for me, what the judge said in my testimony of 12 to 14 days. However, the overall tax case wasn't won, and the investors went back to tax court, and they also went back to the tax department asking for relief under fairness provisions. And that's been an ongoing thing, and it's still going now. So
that's incredible. Just
I've summed it up very tightly.
You summed it up there, but you summing up, give us that happened, that was early 80s to basically now. You're talking that's, what is that? That's almost 40 years old now.
Yeah. Well, for instance, it started in 1985. Okay. Myself personally, I got an investment in the tax shelter, which I deemed it as an investment, not a tax shelter, because my tax rate in 85, 86, 87 was not to the level of the rich Canadians who were buying that shelter. Right. So when my deductions were not approved in 86 and 87, I terminated taking the deductions in 88, 89, and 90, because the benefit of the taxation was not that much to me.
Right.
It was more of an investment. But a lot of our investors and our clients, they were into a program through their accountants and through their tax lawyers where they took deductions 85, 86, 87, 88, 89, and some even 1990. So the tax case dispute was over 5 or 6 years, depending on when they got in. For me, it was just 86 and 87. I terminated because I wanted my 88, 89, and 90 taxation years to be assessed and to be clear, and for them not to be held back because of other things I was doing, right? Mm-hmm. Other people, through their professional advice, they were told, and by the way, the other thing too, it's also a tax shelter, it's a tax deferral because there was a buyback. So when somebody actually exercised their buyback, they would be recapturing, and otherwise they'd have to actually put part of what they deducted back on their taxes at different tax rates in future years. So the program was all basically from 1985 to 1995, 5 years of deductions and then 5 years of recapture because there was a buyback with limited partnership units, right? So a lot of people don't particularly understand that, but people who are in the field, they do understand that, right? So yes, it was something from 1985 and the whole program should have gone through 1996, but it was truncated because Revenue Canada took the position that these deductions were not deductible and the business was not properly constituted. And later, they took the position that the expenses were actually not even paid for. Okay, and that's how the whole process began. From what I understand is there's tax laws and there's the Tax Act, and then there's Revenue Canada puts out these so-called interpretation bulletins.
Right.
And these interpretation bulletins are how they are going to perceive the tax laws and how they're going to treat taxpayers in particular situations.
Yeah.
So they like to test interpretation bulletins in court. And sometimes they are aligned with the law. Other times, there's been decisions where tax judges tell them, you should spend your efforts in getting the law changed on that particular point rather than trying to push, the process of the interpretation bulletin as if it's law. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, I'm just being a little parrot here. I mean, I don't understand this to a litigation, but I've got experience from what lawyers and tax accountants have told me. Mm-hmm. So I've absorbed this information, not being an expert in it, but by just being a sponge around the water that deals with it.
Well, I think the takeaway here too is how that experience can help you now when you're talking to potential prospects that have that run into either tax problems or haven't filed for a number of years, or there's a multitude of things that can happen in taxes. But I think you've been through enough now that you can basically address any situation that comes up or problems and get the point across that how important it is to get up to speed and get at least, like say if you're 10 years behind, to get at least filed. Even if you have an amount outstanding, you can always make an arrangement with Revenue Canada. But the importance of maintaining the filing and maintaining good standing with Revenue Canada.
Yes, I mean, like most people that I talk to, they see their problem is almost, how would you say, insurmountable. Yeah. Okay. And what I find, I like to introduce humor and fun talk in any topic. All right. It seems to calm down the situation. So one of the main things I say is you've never been to Egypt, but you're in denial. Right. so bottom line is that they see their problem as insurmountable. Yeah. That's why they're not addressing it. Yeah. Okay. And I've told certain clients, and even before I got involved with the tax mechanic, I would tell people, just from my experience, to file a nil return is better than not filing at all. Yeah. Because when you file a nil return, you can always revise it. Yeah. Okay. And even if you file a return that is not at a later date deemed to be completely correct, okay, you can always refile it. Yeah. Or you can make adjustments in future years, like loss carry forward or loss carry back, right? Yeah. There's all kinds of provisions.
Adjustments.
Yeah, I mean,
the voluntary disclosure program to report unreported income.
See, I didn't even know until I met you, Fraser. I didn't even know there's a voluntary disclosure program.
Yeah, I think a lot of people don't.
Yeah, I mean, they just think that as soon as you put something on paper or file it, it becomes a piece of stone. Yeah. And they're going to hit you over the head with it. So people run and they're scared, right? Now, like, just to be clear, I've never purported that people should evade taxes, okay? But I do believe that people should pay what's fair.
Yeah.
Okay? Like what I understand is that our monetary system in Canada, it's backed by the Canadian government and the Bank of Canada, and the government's only source of income is the taxes that we pay.
That's it.
Like the money that we see, it's basically a promissory note signed by a dead person with no assets behind it. So unless the government is capable of, and Canadians are capable of paying tax, our currency isn't worth anything, right? So I think that if all Canadians file income taxes and pay their amount, and some Canadians, they don't file, they're hurting themselves because they're not getting back the money that they deserve, right?
Yeah, and you look at, when you compare countries, the first thing is to look at the tax system. You look at, say, Cuba, for example, they don't have tax, but they don't have a lot of the amenities that we have. They don't have the roads, the infrastructure, because we have a strong tax system and we have good infrastructure for the most part. I mean, everybody complains of that, but you compare to other countries, and that's because we've got a solid tax base. Look at the States, for example. They have actually a lower tax base than we do. They don't have, tax on, they get, their marginal rates are lower, even for corporate and for personal and state. All of it's lower.
Yeah.
But they've got areas that don't have, for example, they don't have universal health care. We have that because of our tax system.
Yes.
I think they look at us and they go, wow, man, that's...
Well, I mean, just to give you an example, you made the example of US and Canada. In the professional sports industry, in hockey, okay, the US taxes are 35%. You can deduct your interest on your principal residence.
Right.
Okay. So in essence, I've watched shows because I'm a fan of hockey. When a Canadian team offers a contract to a player compared to a US team, there's a $500,000 advantage to being in the States. Okay. So they add $1 million pre-tax, okay, to the contract for whatever the US is offering. And even though like Canadian teams are paying all the players in US dollars, just because of the tax ramifications of living in Canada or living in the States, they offer another $1 million to make up for the $500,000 after-tax dollars of signing with a US team. Now, the fact that a lot of hockey players are Canadian, they look at safety, they look at where they want to raise their kids.
That's exactly, but
that's the advantage.
Where you raise the kids, the healthcare system, but all that is related to the tax.
Yeah,
right? We get none of that. You don't have safety. Safety, you have it from the police, from our tax.
Exactly. Right? I mean, and any society, it's not, from what I understand, the success of a society is not based on taxation. It's based on the resources you have to take care of your poor and to get your least successful citizens off the ground. Yeah. And we do that better, I think, than any other country.
I think so.
Yeah.
Speak to, say a prospect comes to you and they haven't filed for 10 years and they're overwhelmed and they not sure what to do in the prosecution and the unknown. How do you address that with them?
Well, I mean, first of all, I ask them why they haven't filed, okay? And out of them telling me why they haven't filed, I glean from them what their fears are. A lot of their fears, however, are unbased, okay? And then I tell them, okay, if you haven't filed for 10 years, okay, some people don't file out of protest. Other people don't file out of shame, right? But I let them know that if you haven't filed for 10 years, then I discuss what kind of communication have you had from the tax department, right? And a lot of them say nothing, right? So I realized that I tried to explain to them. I said, if they're not contacting you, if they don't have a tax burden that they're pursuing with you, and you're not filing, it's because you're not hurting them. you're hurting yourself.
Yeah.
If you're T Ford, you're already paying your pound of tax on deductions from employee remittances, and you've probably actually overpaid, because they usually set those up so that at the end of the year, if everything pans out, you get a small tax return.
Mm-hmm.
That's why people go to H&R Block and file their tax return. That's why H&R Block does tax returns based not on doing your tax returns, but on basically highlighting what you're owed and taking a piece of it to give you the money right away.
Discounting the returns.
So they're not really a filing company. They're basically a quantitative factoring company.
Which is really crazy nowadays when you think, because my clients get them in 8 days.
Yeah.
So you gotta, if you file electronically, average is 8 days. So,
exactly.
So just delaying that gratification for 8 days
it's pretty costly. Yeah.
It is costly for what they do. The voluntary disclosure program, prosecution, I think that's something that people are afraid of, but like your experience from, the tax mechanic and other clients and that, the voluntary disclosure program has been I found it to be amazing, where there's been, out of all my clients over the past 10 years, not one has been prosecuted, hasn't even been mentioned. But I hear constantly from clients, they think they're afraid of that, because I saw on a TED Talk where they say we fear what we talk about. So like in the early 80s, when we were talking about Jaws, the movie came out, almost all of us to this day fear a shark attack.
Yes.
Whereas the likelihood of you being eaten by a shark is almost zero. But the same thing with tax. We talk about it. It's in the movies. Revenue Canada once, you hear about it in the States a lot, even though we're inundated with American TV. I think that's where a lot of that comes from. And you hear, actors and that, Leslie Snipes and that get, on prison for tax evasion and not reporting, or Al Capone and all these stories and that. But in Canada, like your experience has been hard, the threat of prosecution really is not real.
I mean, I think the threat of prosecution in taxation is unless you're running a business that deals with investments that have to do with large tax deductions, I think the average Canadian, the prosecution is nil to none. Plus the other thing too, 90% of what we worry about, and people that don't file worry a lot about that they haven't filed. I tell people 90% of what you worry about
never happens.
Yeah. Okay. And then as another thing, like worry is one of those things that takes up a lot of your time. It doesn't exist. Yeah. If you worry about something, then just deal with it, right?
Yeah.
Like, I tell people worry is a very poor application of your imagination.
It is.
Okay. And the best thing to deal with concerns over filing taxes is file them.
It's action.
Exactly.
Take the action. Yeah. And even in worst case scenario, I tell clients that, come and file, even if you have no money, and you owe a large sum of money. So what? You go to Revenue Canada and say, sorry guys, I don't have any money. I'll see what I can do 6 months from now. But they're not going to take any action from there. They may, unless you have properties and stuff like that, but they will work with you. There's always a solution.
Yeah.
Not filing is there's never an excuse for that.
Well, yeah. And then the thing is, a lot of them, when they haven't filed for 8-10 years, right? Once they convince themselves that they're going to file, then they start thinking about, okay, do we file all 8 years at once, or do we file the last 4 years? And honestly, I don't know the answer to that, right? I really don't know the answer to that. Each person is different, right? Some people want to file all of them at once. Other people want to file the oldest ones first and see where they sit, right?
Yeah.
It's every person is different.
That's why I like using the VDP program, because we file them as a batch to a separate department who does this all the time. I talk to them every day, various people, they're all in Quebec, and they call me every day in my team, and they understand that there's life things that happen. There's many reasons why that can happen. Like, you could have a medical situation. You could have a failed business. You could be divorced. You could be out of the country and you came back, you didn't think you had to do it, or there's a lot of legitimate reasons. But I think no matter what the reason is, there's no reason for not filing.
Yeah.
So if you owe money, you can make a payment arrangement. If you got money coming back, certainly. I find that almost everybody with T4s is really doing themselves a disservice.
Exactly.
Because 9 out of 10 are getting money back. But on top of that, you're, preventing yourself from getting good credit, everything else, because, you need your notice of assessment for everything that you do. And really, it's so easy now. You've seen it. We've got electronic forms. Within a day, you can sign them. You send an e-transfer that you could be literally filed the next day. Or we send a notice right away to the VDP, so they can't take any action until we file. And so a number of days later, your problem's solved. It's just literally, you can pick up the phone, talk to someone like yourself, gives you all the parameters, and your problem's solved. I can't think of an easier way to solve like kind of a heavy problem where you could just pick up the phone. I've had some problems where I wish I could just pick up the phone and have it solved like that. But nowadays you can do that, and I think I'll leave it here. One of the last things I want to say is with COVID-19 and that, the courts are now just starting to open up and that, but they've been really good about extending payments and not assessing penalties. So now's a really good time to get cleaned up. You're at home in your pajamas anyway, pretending you're working on Zoom calls and stuff, right? Get your taxes cleared up. But what do you want to leave us with, Ossie? Give us something positive for.
Okay, the positive thing I want to leave everybody with is that regarding to COVID, right? I've noticed that a lot of people are not using their cars, not generating the expenses in restaurants, which is only half deductible anyway, and driving for their business purposes. There's always a silver lining. From what I understand, is that the expenses of working out of your home now have increased.
Yes.
Okay. So just dealing with a tax professional and realizing the advantages or the changes, even since March, okay, can be a huge benefit, which translates into, you being a stand-up citizen and having your taxes filed. And if you don't have your taxes filed, you're still a stand-up citizen, because 99% of the people that don't file taxes are owed money.
Yeah.
People just think that if you're not filing your taxes, you're evading taxes. That's not true.
No.
All you're doing is really hurting yourself.
Yeah.
So I just want to leave people with the fact that if you're working from home and you think that, you're going to pay even more tax because you're not driving to the office or driving to meetings or having business meetings and experiencing travel expenses and stuff like that. Well, there's a flip side to that now the provisions of your home are literally more deductible, because that's where you're doing your business. And I know that I don't know the full details, right? Yeah. But I know that that's increased.
There is definitely even T4 people, because a lot of T4 people have gone home to to work, and so now they got home office expenses. So, if you haven't filed, give us a call. We'll get you filed up real quick. Thank you, Ossie, and welcome aboard to the Tax Mechanic.
Thank you.